Oh yes, finally here. And these are the revised, this lower part. This top nut is 19 millimeter. And what I also like is these are supposed to be rust resistant for this piece here. Because what happens is if these rust and they're adjusted where the spring sits, say your car's lowered and you go to raise it, you go to spin these and they're seized up. This is just awesome. You've got the two rears, the two fronts. Very neat. Of course, you know what these are. These are for adjusting the ride height. And they give you some spring seats. These are what the hats will sit on top of and will retain the springs. And one of the coolest things I've ever seen, you get an actual badge with stickers. And then there's a adjuster here. I have about 116,000 miles on this car, and it's 116,000 original miles for these top hats. The top hats are rubber bushings with a bearing inside. If these get bad and old, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and get these. A lot of people use the Group N, which are the rally ones, and your stock ones are going to be fine. The Group N's are a harder rubber, and that might translate more vibration. Front mounts with screws. These are just OEM. They're nothing special. But new bearings and new rubber. That was the most important thing. The taller struts are for the rear and the shorter are for the front. Because these are height and dampening adjustment, there's a rubber cap at the end of the dial for the dampening adjustment. Be careful with that dial not to over rotate it. To assemble the front coilover, there's a collar that you need to take off, and then you want to put the spring seat on. Make sure you have the correct hat, which is the triangle hat for the front. And those rounded ones are for the rear. The rubber boots were all the same size. The spring seat has a notch and will only go over the valve one way. The collar goes over the valve, and then you can attach the strut mount. If you hold the valve, you can put the 19mm on, just thread it on a few times. We're going to finish that up later. To assemble the rear coilovers, there's a spacer once you put the boot on, and a collar. Then the spring seat is a little different for the rear, and it actually has like a cup that you have to cup the top of the mount in. That'll sit on the springs. Then you can adjust the springs up just a little bit. Then you can apply the top hat, and the top hat will sit in the little cup of the spring seat. I did the same thing here with the 19mm on top, just a few threads on, and then we'll tighten that down once it's in the car. Now that my coilovers are fully assembled, it's time to take the old ones out. You'll have to remove the rear seats to get to the rear mounts. And that requires two 12mm bolts for the bottom seat and three 12mm bolts for the top part. The bottom half will come out and slide out on its own. The backrests have three 12mm here. I've already loosened mine, so this is just for demonstration. There's one in the middle and there's one on the other end. Now lifting it up is a little tricky because there's three brackets on top that hold to these little bars. So you have to pull up on it, not out. Pull up towards the roof, and then make sure you get it past the seat belt. Once you've cleared the hooks from the bars, you can slide the seat out. And this will give you access to the top mounts of the struts for the rear. I'm taking out my old Feel, rebuilt, revalved, and Zerk fitted. And what we're doing here, you got two 19mm bolts right here and right here. And the bolt side is here and the nut is on the other side. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take like an opened end and get that way down in there, because there's kind of some interference with the boot and you don't want to mess the boot up. That's right, Das Boot. And go in here and get all the bolts that are on the top hat. You may have a little metal cover, and then these 12mm. 3 12mm on top. This brake line right here you have to get off. You have to pry that up. I should have probably done this before, but it's not making any stress on it. But you definitely want to pry that clip up right there. And this will take the brake line up this way. Once the brake line's removed, you can take the rotor and the whole hub and drop it down. The whole assembly should drop down with it and should be able to be taken out of the car without any type of problem. The rear mount will only go in one way, so make sure you orientate this right when you reinstalled it. Once you have the correct side matched up, you can go ahead and just place these in and make sure you align those 3 12mm bolts with the strut mount. Now the fronts are a little harder. You have two 12mm that are holding on the brake line and the ABS. I'm literally trying for like a day to get these 19mm off. I finally found the solution. You want to put a wrench on the nut side and lean it against the frame, and then you can crack the bolt. This is the best way I found to do it. Then I used an impact gun just to zip it off the rest of the way, and that worked really well. Now something to note here, this upper bolt can only go in one way. And it's the only one that has a washer on the nut side. Now this bolt is larger, that's a camber bolt. And you can only put that in one way. On the bottom, the same thing. I leaned it up against the frame of the car, or the body of the car, and then cracked them open. Once done, you can get these 3 12mm that hold the strut mount. Torque specs goes as follows. For the rear suspension, the 3 upper strut locking nuts are 14.5 foot-pounds. The two 19mm for the rear suspension are 162 foot-pounds. The two 19mm for the front are 129 foot-pounds. Once those are out, this is a little tricky to drop out. Now the boot's going to be in the way. The boots are a really thick, strong rubber, so you really can't damage them too easily, but you really want to be careful because you're going to have to slide the bottom of the strut along the boot. I used a lot of WD-40. This top 19mm is very important. Tein says 53 nuke meters or 39 foot-pounds will get these all the way down to where they need to be on the piston. Don't forget to tighten up all 4 of the top piston nuts. Alright, after you make sure that the 12mm bolts are torqued down and the seats are properly in, the top hats are mounted, you can take a 19mm deep socket because you don't want to mess up this adjuster here with the rubber cap on it. Just make sure you go over that properly. Now you can take some low torque. You can hold the actual piston tight while you tighten this nut up. You have room once you close this. It's a good idea just to go around and recheck and make sure every bolt is torqued and tightened down. Tein provides you with 2 adjustment wrenches to adjust the ride height. There are 2 half-inch drive holes, so you can put a breaker bar onto these wrenches. These adjustments are personal preference if you want the car to sit higher or if you want the car to sit lower than the ride height from the factory. Take note that this tab is properly seated. To match the left and right side up, you can measure between the black tube and the bottom of the seat lock. Then you can use your breaker bar and the adjustment wrenches to make sure they're adjusted to 46 foot-pounds. That will lock the seat lock in where the spring is. Lowering the seat lock will lower the car, and raising it will raise the car up. Once you've got the tires back on, it'll take a little bit for the springs to settle in.